On the Choose to Think podcast, I will encourage and empower you to engage and optimize your best thought life in practical, meaningful ways so that you can live day by day in joy, peace, and God's purpose despite all externals. This is Victoria, and welcome back to the Choose to Think podcast. I'm so glad you're here. On today's show, I chat with Stephen Pattiso from Cap City Church in Frankfurt about how to both verbally and practically share our faith. We talk apologetics, or defending our faith, and what that really means and how we can actually do it. We also talk about how sometimes we think we're not qualified to share our faith, or we compare ourselves to others who seem to be sharing their faith in really marvelous ways. We feel somehow less than, and we kind of cower back in fear. So Doc encourages us to shine the light of Christ in our own unique and personal ways and to release the outcome. You're going to hear Doc speak about the privileges and benefits of being a Jesus follower and how it makes sense, how we can overcome our fears and share our personal experiences with others. And then if we feel a bit shaky in defending our faith when it's under attack, we don't have to have all the answers, but we can instead point others to resources or other individuals who have helped us along the way. Matter of fact, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting app, check out the show notes where I've provided links to the 7 books that Doc references and recommends from the God Canceled series at Cap City. It's a series that runs until a bit after Easter. You can also find these resources on my blog at choosetothink.co. That's choosetothink.co with the number 2. And listen, please click like and share the episode with others who might need a shot in the arm or a shot in the soul of encouragement and inspiration. I really would appreciate your subscribing to YouTube, dropping a comment, or emailing me with any questions you might have about sharing your Christian faith. And you can reach me at choosetothink@gmail.com. I'll do my very best to help you. And Doc is amazing. I love his preaching style. He's both academic and practical in his approach. And please come visit us at Cap City. You'll even enjoy the Wednesday night classroom setting where Doc invites questions about the series. They go right along with it in a more informal environment. And if you wait till the end, you're going to hear him pause a long time after I ask him the question, what do you want your grandchildren to know about your faith? And he concludes talking about the importance of lightheartedness and laughter. And without further ado, here's Doc. Welcome, everybody, to the Choose to Think podcast. And I am so glad that you're tuning in regularly. And if you're new to the show, especially, thank you so much for joining. I've got Rico here with me. Some of you know Rico, and I have an extra special treat of a guest on the show today as well. It's Stephen Pattiso from Capital City Christian Church. People fondly call him Doc. And he has been at Capital City, and you can correct me, Doc, if I'm wrong, but I have written down 1995.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, we're so excited to have you to the show. I, for several reasons. And I was thinking, how do I start this particular interview? And one of the reasons, I should say first, that I invited you on this show, in addition to just hearing you speak and having you share your wisdom, is that you're doing a series now at Capital City called God Canceled. And I've determined that we have at least 3 things in common. Number 1, you live on a farm, I believe, and I love farm life. Do you have animals there?
We've got about 20 calves, and we've got some chickens, and then just, of course, foxes and raccoons and skunks and the rest.
Okay. Oh, I love that. See, that's a good, strong bond we have. And then number 2, you have a heated jacket or a vest that we have in common. Matter of fact, I have mine right here. I don't know what your brand is, but mine is called Ororo, Ororo. And
mine is a venture.
Okay. Yeah.
I worn it the last days, but I didn't wear it today.
Yeah. I never even knew they made those things, but I feel like I've got Star Trek, you can press that red button and it's red means it heats up. I love it. My kids got that for me for Christmas. So that was another teeny connection we have. But the third connection, probably a little more important, is that I think I could safely say that you and I both and I'm going to say, quote, love apologetics and
Mhm.
defending our faith. And this series that you're doing, God Canceled, has just been phenomenal. Really kind of just starting maybe over the last month or so, I guess. And I would encourage anybody to go to YouTube or the church website to just tune into those episodes and kind of catch up. Even the Wednesday night class that is just an open class, more like a, you offer or you allow and invite questions during that Wednesday night class. So it's almost like a classroom experience in a way, and it's supplementing or going along with your Sunday sermons, all of those rabbit trails that you talk about. But it's just been just so wonderful. And I'm learning and challenged all at the same time. And years ago, I did a poll for some of the listeners and some of the folks in my audience, asking them, what do you want to have on the show? And a few people actually said, Victoria, I don't know how to defend my faith. Could you put something on about actually standing bold in our faith? How do we do that? What does that mean? Where do we start? So I thought that would make a pretty good launch pad for us. Just in a nutshell, what would you tell that grandmother? All right, I'm just going to say a grandmother. How would you encourage her to be bold in her faith when she really kind of is afraid or doesn't know where to start? Or what does it really mean to confess Christ? What does all that mean? Is that too big of a question?
It is a huge question, but it's not a bad starting point.
Okay.
And it's hard because different people are going to approach it much differently. We all have a different bent. We all have different strengths and weaknesses with respect to how we might approach that kind of a question. Of course, since I kind of grew up in academics, then I would kind of go after it a little bit differently than many might. Peter tells us to be able to give a reason for the hope that's within us. What I fear is that in our culture, Christianity is becoming more and more marginalized, mocked and ridiculed. At one time, it was pretty much just assumed that there was a God and that Jesus was his son. At this point, that's tougher. And our kids especially are being tossed around pretty hard. And so what I think the way to start is just to have a bold, confident faith of your own. We don't have to be intimidated by any of the things that are being said about Christianity. Being a Christian makes sense. The Christian life makes way more sense than any of the alternatives. It makes more sense of just logically, it makes more sense practically, it makes more sense scientifically, about any way that you go after it. The Christian life is a better alternative. There's two ways that I think that a person who was not really academically inclined might think about doing it. Number one is that your own experience of God is something that really cannot be questioned. Oftentimes I'm going to go a little further than that myself as far as why we believe in God. But my own experience of God, that's something you might doubt my logic or my data, but it's difficult just to say, well, you didn't experience what you're saying that you experienced. And so your own story with God, the difference it has made in your life, can be a powerful starting point. The other thing that I think that might be useful now is the early Christian apologetics. If you go back to the time in the New Testament, the Jewish apologetics about that same time, the early Christian apologetics right after the time of the New Testament, one of the ways that they went after it was like this. They looked at the utopias of their culture, and they said, what you dream of, we live. Your goals, we experience. And so when you look even at some different passages in the book of Acts, and certainly other places in the early Christian apologetics, they said, guys, the kind of thing that you wish could be, we live it out in the community of the church. And I think in our culture, which many of the goals that our culture is pursuing are great goals. The way they're going after them are dumb as a brick. And so it's not going to work. And so I think for us to say, we share your dreams, what you want, what you'd like to see, how you'd like to see people get along, how you'd like to see people have each other's backs. We share those things, but we kind of think that God's recipe for that is just way better than the way you're going about it. And if you just give it a shot, watch us, live with us, that you're going to find a better way of doing life. So I think that was one of the strategies of the early church. It was one of the strategies of the early Jewish apologists as well. And we are now in a place where the culture is hostile, oftentimes, to the church. But many of the dreams that they're pursuing, I have sympathy with their dream, and I don't have much sympathy for their techniques on getting there. And just say, yeah, we share your dreams, but why don't you try it our way? We think this is the way God designed it. He wants that for you too. And so a couple of approaches maybe.
Just to bring it almost to a practical level, let's say I'm standing at Kroger, and where do I share my faith? Do I see that there's a lady in front of me who may be struggling with her kid? And do I do anything different? Do I say, oh, do you want me to pray for you? She might look at me like, what are you thinking? Or why would you do that? Or do I just quietly pray for her? Or is my faith and my defense of my faith through my actions and my behavior? That's kind of some of the stuff I wanted to get into, where, people think we're wacko sometimes if we just step up and say, let me pray for you. I've even had some people say, no, thank you. Do not pray for me. And which is, I guess we need wisdom and discernment for that. But I stumbled upon an accident once, a lady who was badly injured, and I managed to make my way down into the ravine to see her car was flipped, and there were some other gentlemen stopping, and we'd called for the ambulance, and I said, ma'am, what's your name? Let me just pray for you. And she was very adamant about not wanting to receive any kind of prayer. And I'm like, that kind of took me aback. But I guess my point in all of this is, back to what you said about yes, sharing our own experiences. That's true, and no one can refute that. But we want to take that a step further, probably, and even examine the object of our faith, because that's where we can probably, we can apply another measure of, I guess, the logic and all of that to it. And the Judeo-Christian God, having our faith in him, is reasonable, and it is practical, and it does make sense. But other people may come up with other things that are equally important to them, but then they don't vet out. It doesn't make sense. And I also think your point of inviting people in or to try our faith is important. And that's kind of almost a sweet and kind way to invite them into our belief system and to allow us to share why our faith is so important to us. But so second to all of that, as I'm rambling around a little bit to get to what I'm trying to ask, is if we put all of this in a practical way, for example, how do you defend your faith every day? What do you do, Doc, in defense of your faith?
I have never really perceived it in that fashion. I rarely take the defense.
Okay.
But I don't really think in terms of defending the faith unless it is attacked. Okay. I want to boldly live the faith. I don't want to be in a defensive posture. I want to boldly live the faith. And if someone asks questions, then grin and go after it. Now, I know that some of the stuff that I'm dealing, because, we talked about both look at how we live and live out your ideals, and we talked about sharing your own experiences. You talked about another facet of it, which is just, what you believe in solid? Is it sound? And that's exactly where I'm going in this whole series. Now, not everybody's going to be able to answer all of those questions equally well, because we all have different gifts, we all have different perspectives, and that's one of the reasons that there is a body of Christ where we all have to have each other's backs. And part of this is going to be varied. I have a one family in the church that has a skeptical grandfather who's ill, but he's curious. They are not capable of answering his questions, but one of the resources that we're using as a background for this series, I suggested that they get it, and they start working with this resource with Grandpa, and he's fascinated by it. There are people that we point folks to. We have allies in this thing. I don't have to know all the answers. I know very few answers. I just know a lot of people who know a lot of answers. And so I ask them or talk to them or arrange a meeting between them. And so being confident about your own faith, knowing where you can go to get answers to questions that perhaps are posed that you do not know how to handle. We're in this thing together. And so part of this is to give people resources. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to point out, because it tallies to what you were talking about. Most apologetics is not, we think it's designed to defend the faith against an attacker. It rarely works that way. Most always apologetics is encouraging a person who is being attacked to remain true to their faith. It's almost presented in such a fashion, if an honorable person, honest person, reflective person were to hear these things, it would be persuasive. But most of the time, apologetics is designed to build a backbone in Christians. Too many Christians they're almost apologetic and they're scared. Is the foundation that I believe in solid? And what I'm trying to do is to say, listen, even if you can't answer all the questions, let's think through it together. The foundation you're standing on is extremely strong. Now, there are questions that come up, there are ways we can deal with it. Let's talk and give you resources, drag them to church, do whatever. But that part we can do together. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I guess then let me just dial it back to, how do you boldly live your faith? How do you do that? What does that mean?
That's really easy for me.
Okay.
But a lot harder for people who are not like me. I'm a pastor. Okay. So people expect me to be a man of faith. They expect me to try to live it out. Sometimes that's annoying because I'd like to misbehave, and it's kind of hard to do when you're a pastor. And so, because people watch. But in any case, for me to kind of stand bold, I can stand up there and I can preach and I can encourage. I mean, this is what I do every single day. And so I don't use myself as a model. Your job is way tougher than mine. My son who goes to Toyota, and the people in our church family that scatter all over this town in a variety of ways, they've got the tough job. Mine, as far as standing tall for the faith, is pretty simple. I come to church and I go to work and I preach and I teach. And so that is really not a model. But to be a Christian at work, to be a Christian at home. You mentioned occasionally, can I pray for you? That's a bold thing that ordinarily works well. Someone is hurting and you say, do you mind if I have a prayer with you? If they say no, that's fine. We don't try to force ourselves on anybody. But most of the time, there'll be receptivity to something like that. Can I help you? One of the things that we're trying to do at church this year is we've got this little program we're calling 12,000 Nudges, where every month we're trying to find some way where you can do something just to say, I'm a Christian and we love you too. It's a little tiny tangible things. Last month it was a Yes, It's Free card with God's grace is free. We want you just to taste a little of it. This next month, around Valentine's Day, we're going to try to give out about 12,000 flowers. Only instead of our kids giving them out, we want everybody in the church to pick them up and go hand out flowers to a neighbor, to someone that is just needs a little touch of love. We're going to do something like that every month. And that's just a way that we're trying to find a tangible, easy way to stand tall as a Christian. And so I don't know if that helps.
Yes, I love that. I love that program. I thought the cards were all year. So that's delightful that they changed by month. Okay.
Every month will have a different way.
Oh, wow. That's so creative. I love that. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at, because sometimes I think, like, how I'm dealing with my neighbors, there's so much I would love to do for my neighbors, literally my neighbors in my neighborhood. But sometimes I just can't find the bandwidth there, because I have grown children and grandchildren. I work full time. I have parents in Winchester. And so I have a lot of people. I'm so blessed with the number of people who desire my company in one way or the other, and what I might be able to, little small things I might be able to do for them. But sometimes I'm like, I ask myself, Victoria, are you the best neighbor here? Because maybe I should be baking bread for someone, or just reaching out, so sometimes I think, am I living boldly for my faith just with these people, even right next door to me? And it's those are the little practical things that I was trying to get at. Can you think of other things that we could do that would demonstrate that? And I don't mean to like guilt myself in it, I do what I can, but sometimes I wonder if I'm not living the Christian life I should be, just with my neighbors, and I'm not helping them as much. Maybe you sometimes feel that, like, I'm a pastor, maybe there's more I can do, and I don't. Everybody is looking at you. Everybody knows I'm a Christian, and I don't take that lightly, but sometimes I feel a little guilty, like maybe I'm not being a better one or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah. People get a little bit too worried about that. But there is an example, and I usually don't try to talk. When I talk about myself, I always try to talk about my weaknesses, not strengths. But I'm going to talk about my wife, and I'm going to talk about one of her strengths, because she's extremely good at this. I am not. Okay.
Okay.
When my wife, she worked at Sears and Lowe's for 25 years or so as a salesperson. And there were constantly people coming into church, because she's very bold with the customer. You go to church somewhere, you got to try ours. Person's having a trouble. Well, have you talked to God about it? She is very, very upfront on that kind of a thing. But now that she's retired, she has basically baked bread for everybody within range along Shadrick Ferry. Constantly makes apple butter, and the delivery drivers, if she catches them, they always get a small jar of apple butter in return for the delivery. And some of them are bringing back the jars and asking for larger ones.
Refill.
But it's she is constantly finding a way to love on the delivery guys and the neighbors, and she does that basically with bread and homemade apple butter, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
we have actually one delivery guy talked. I mean, I think he had relatives in the church, and he was telling his parents about this guy, this lady out at Chandler was doing that kind of stuff, and it was Julie, but it's sweetness.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though, Doc, is I'm not doing those things. But I wish I could.
Well, neither do I. Well, it's all different. Everyone finds their own niche. The fact is, what you are doing here is a niche. Okay. Not all of us can do the same thing, but all of us can do something. You find some place where you make your contribution to the kingdom. Everybody's been gifted in that kind of a fashion. Right now, that's what Julie is doing. That's not the way she used to do it. It's the way she's doing it now. You should not feel guilty that you're not doing it her way. What you should try to figure out is, am I finding a niche where I can make a contribution to the kingdom? We all tend to denigrate ourselves when we compare ourselves to someone else, which is ludicrous. The very fact that you've got this thing going on, God smiles.
Thank you for that reminder. And
yeah. Steve Brown, one time he wrote this book. I can't remember its name, but he said, "Don't forget that every single one of us is an underachiever in the kingdom, and God is proud of us anyway."
Okay. Okay, so I love these practical examples of ways that we can boldly live our faith
Mhm.
as God intended in our giftings and, in our own special way. And a lot of what we deal with on the podcast is our thoughts. And sometimes our thoughts can play interference with our behavior. Well, a lot of times it does. And so I'm thinking about a listener who still maybe just isn't convinced. Maybe there's someone who doesn't share her faith at all verbally, say beside maybe her kids or her family, they know she's a Christian, she goes to church and all of those things, and she serves her family, but maybe she doesn't feel like she's, quote, winning people to Christ. And maybe she's afraid. Maybe she doesn't have the boldness that Julie has. Even on the job, Julie had boldness. And that's just a beautiful thing. But some people might say, I couldn't dare do that. So how would you advise someone who doesn't really, other than demonstrating loving deeds, they don't really verbalize it? Is there a place where we should all be verbalizing our faith to other people?
When that door opens,
Mm.
you don't force that door open. But when that door opens, yes. I mean, there is a time when you pray for the opportunity. You pray that God will give you the eyes to see the opportunity. You pray that if that opportunity is seen, that God will guide you so that you'll say something or do something that's going to be useful. And you do not take upon your shoulders the responsibility of persuading the person. We have a lot of folks who just get so convicted because they tried and failed. God doesn't promise any success. He wants us to try to be faithful. But I wouldn't worry about, trying to force that opening. We look for people in times when we can stand alongside, and we offer to stand alongside. If they're rejected, well, they rejected Jesus more often than they accepted him too. Mm-hmm. And we don't worry about it. We speak truth and grace, and just cannot get too obsessed with our failures.
Let me ask you this, and kind of going back to the grandfather who was reluctant. Our families, most of us have someone in our families, whether parents, children, cousins, aunts, uncles, you name it, who are not Jesus followers. And how do we really witness? I'm changing it now, instead of defend our faith, just how do we witness to them when we do live in a world that is antagonistic toward the Christian faith? How do we still just look for those open opportunities, or is there something else that we could do?
Oftentimes, no. Sometimes, yes. But here's the deal. Here's what happens. We tend to think that if they haven't turned yet, then perhaps they haven't heard us yet. And so we say the same thing more loudly or more sharply. Doesn't work that way. We have to, I know, I can remember one instance of someone who's very, very close to me, and they were working with a father with a child. The child wasn't going to listen, or he listened, and then because he didn't respond, Dad said it over and over and over and over again, to the degree that the son pushed Dad away because he wasn't saying anything new. Son already knew everything Dad was going to say because Dad had said it repeatedly. So many times. Yeah. The passion was not making it better. The passion was making it worse. We have to speak the truth. Once the person knows the truth, we have to allow God's Spirit to work on their hearts. And we have to recognize that God values that person's freedom more than he values that person's obedience. God is not going to force himself, and you can't force him. And there'll be times when people that all of us love, they're not going to turn to Christ. It's not because you have not said the right thing or done the right thing. It's because God has given them freedom. Mm-hmm. And God will not override that freedom. And so we have to be willing to speak hard truth with grace. But we cannot just keep hammering on that hard truth, thinking that as we raise our voice and repeat ourselves, that the person is finally going to break down and do things our way. Mm. God allows freedom. And that's a heart-wrenching thing, because we have mamas who pray for a son that just will not turn. We have kids who pray for parents who just will not turn, and the love there is so deep. And they fear that if he doesn't turn, it's because I didn't say the right thing. I didn't do the right thing. And you have to understand that as much as you love that person, as much as you desire that person to have peace with Christ, you don't desire that a fraction of what God wants. And the work that you have done trying to turn that person is not a fraction of what God has already done in that person's life to nudge them and to draw them. And so to take personal responsibility, if you have not shared Christ, if you have not showed Christ, okay, then there's a problem. If you have shared Christ and shown them Christ and they don't turn, at the end, it's going to break your heart, but it breaks his heart too. And he's not going to force them, and you can't.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned that in the series, and it's actually, on the one hand, liberating to kind of look at it that way. And there's some freedom there where we can just say, okay, I've done what I can do, and kind of release the outcome, essentially, and release that to the Lord.
I have to do that all the time. You know, the fact is, either when you counsel or when you preach, some will respond and many will not. Mm-hmm. And it was basically the same when Jesus preached. Some responded and many did not. And it's because God will not override the freedom. And it's not because we don't care hard enough or because we don't try hard enough or haven't spoken the truth clearly enough. It's that there has to be desire on the other person to change, to bend. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that is not there. Now, if what I'm worried about is that sometimes, I mean, the gospel, as we mentioned, is offensive because it challenges the I that rolls around in each one of us. But we don't want to add our offense to God's offense. What happens is that too often when we try to present the gospel, which is very challenging, the fact that we are jerks makes it more difficult for them to hear a very difficult gospel. Mm-hmm. And so we don't want to add our offense to its offense. Mm-hmm. Let the gospel be offensive, and you be as gracious and loving and straightforward as you can.
Very good. Why is presenting the gospel a challenge?
All of us, when the Bible talks about all of us being sinners and falling short of the glory of God, all of us have this piece of ourselves. I mean, Paul talks about in Romans 7, you know, I know what's right, I just don't like doing it. And wretched man that I am. Now, I think most Jesus followers can understand that personally. Mm-hmm. There is a part of us that hates, you know, we don't mind there being a God as long as he follows my path. Sometimes what God wants me to do, I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. Sometimes what God wants me to do, it's counterintuitive, you know. It kind of hangs you out to dry. And so there's always this I that wars against Jesus is Lord. And so there has to be a willingness to surrender self if you're going to be a Jesus follower. And the self is you can talk about all the other things that tug back against you, the influence of those around you, the influence of Satan and his minions. But I think the biggest hurdle that you have to overcome is yourself if you're going to be a Jesus follower.
Very good. I have a couple more questions for you, Doc. And one of them is about grandchildren and the legacy that you're leaving.
That is so cool. You want to talk about my grandkids?
I do. You want to talk about them?
No, I'm just teasing you.
What message and how many grandchildren do you have?
I just have 5.
Okay, just 5. Oh my goodness. Okay.
My daughter underachieved. She only produced 2.
Oh my goodness. Well, I just have 3, so you're ahead of me anyway. But aren't grandchildren just the best? I mean, we hear that they're the best, but until we have one, we don't believe. I mean, grandmotherhood or grandparenthood is, it so exceeds any expectation I ever had. It's just a wonderful privilege. So you've got these 5 grandchildren, different ages and so forth, but what is your heart for them? What do you want them most to know about your Christian faith?
Wow, I hate the pause. I'm sorry about that, but you kind of caught me about surprise when you said, what do you want them to know about my Christian faith? Mm-hmm. If you had asked me what I want them to know about the Christian faith, that would have been a simpler answer. Much simpler thing to do. I want them to see a courageous Christian man, a bold Christian man.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think that fearlessness is missing in way too many Christians today. That's one of the reasons we're doing this series. I want us to stand tall, be very confident. My granddaughter is over at Georgetown, and she was talking to me about a couple of the books that she was asked to read, and asked if I had known anything about a couple of the authors. And one of the authors is, holy cow, I can't believe that they're making her read that nonsense. But I want her to be able to look at something like that and laugh, because that's the response it deserves. And a lot of that stuff is going to be thrust at the grandkids, but I want them to have a strong enough faith. I want them to see a strong enough faith in me that it doesn't scare me. It doesn't intimidate me in any way. We're Jesus followers. And I want there to be a boldness and a courage and a lightness to life that they see in us. I like to laugh at anything except my God. And I like to laugh at myself. I like to laugh at the people around me. I like to laugh at things that are going on in the world. I want there to be a lightness because we're not intimidated by anything.
Yeah, what a wonderful point to bring out, because what you've done is you've almost shifted the mindset of what being a Christian is, or the perspective a little bit. Too often, I think people think Christianity is no fun, it's too rigid, it's X, Y, and Z, when really what you're saying is, oh my goodness, there's such privilege here. We have there's energy and there's life here and there's joy and there's peace here. We have something so priceless, really, and we can stand boldly because of that. And there's energy I even felt the energy just as you were saying that. I want to be this courageous Christian man. I want to speak boldly, and I want them to have a backbone, my grandchildren, about their faith, and to not cower away, because being a Christian really is to me, I always think it's a privilege in so many. We have so many privileges. Even to say we have the mind of Christ, I'm so hard trying to discover what that means, but to me it's phenomenal that we have the Spirit within us. I would never want to do my life without that Spirit, knowing that God is with me all the time,
24/7. He's with me, and there's strength in that, and there's energy in that, and we have that, and we want other people to have that. Sometimes it's just hard to get from point A to point B, and to demonstrate our faith through our actions and also through our words. It's, it can be kind of tricky, but thank you for sharing that about your faith and what you want your grandchildren to know. I'm quite certain they know that and see that in you. And just two more questions. One is about books. I know someone who's such an avid book reader, know several people. What could you give a couple of books, and maybe even share the book that we're doing in the series? I do not have that copy, but maybe that would be a good starting place for people who are interested in knocking around some of the hard questions and finding answers and that sort of thing. What do you recommend?
For this series that we're doing right now, these are the primary resources we're using.
Oh gosh, a lot.
Sorry about that. The book that is kind of one I'm encouraging people to get and follow along is this one here.
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, by Richard Simmons.
That's right.
Not the guy dancing with the oldies. Richard Simmons, really sharp dude. And it's a fairly new book, but it's it's just little tiny essays, 2, 3, 4-page essays strung together around a number of themes about why we believe in God. And some of the stuff, we believe in God because there has to be a creator. We believe in God because there has to be a designer. Some people say, how could there be a God if there's evil in the world? And basically he's going to say, how can you say there's evil in the world unless there's a God? Can you really come up with your own morality? I mean, can you have a moral system without God at all that is coherent? What is beauty without God? What is love without God? It just walks down through all of the little fingerprints of God. It's a marvelous, marvelous little book. If you want to go much deeper, a couple of the books that I'm looking, you've got this one here by Eric Metaxas, who's kind of made a reputation. Is Atheism Dead? And it goes quite a bit deeper. I mean, this is a pretty good read, pretty hard read. Not as hard as this one, but it's Stephen Meyer, The Return of the God Hypothesis. The more and more scientists are digging in, the more that they're being able to see, holy cow, there really does seem to be a God. A very, very fine book. A couple of, little things like this, God is Not Dead by Brooks. It's a really nice resource, written more for a college kid, written on that level. Why We Believe by Tawa Anderson. Very, very nice piece of work. And then you've got the old standards. You got people like Timothy Keller, The Reason for God. He is a magnificent guy, and his writing, he's so thoughtful. And of course, you can never not have C.S. Lewis. Mere Christianity. So those are some of the resources, but those are just marvelous. I've got a couple of them just on Jesus, the case for Jesus, but those are some of the things for this series we're doing at church. I have a little teaching team that's going to be presenting the same material to the junior and senior high kids in the evening. And each one of them has a set of these resources that they're going to be going through in order to develop their presentations.
That's wonderful. By the way, you actually remind me in some ways of Tim Keller. You really do. I think he hung the moon. Oh my goodness. I listen to his sermons every single night. I mean, and I've heard some of them like probably half a dozen times each, but oh my God. Matter of fact, I interviewed on the show Christina Stanton, her husband. They went to Redeemer, and her husband wrote his checks every week. He was the CFO or something at the church. And matter of fact, I tried to get Kathy Keller on the show, but I know she declined with everything that's going on with Dr. Keller at the moment. But my goodness, what's that?
He's one of my heroes. He's
just
a superb, and I love not only the way he thinks, but I love his attitude. He's got,
Yes.
he has a Christian way about him.
Yeah, just I enjoy personally the intellectual and the academic slant, but then he also brings in so many stories and so many passages from books he's read and people who inspire him. And one thing that I think he always does, which I try to do often in my podcast, especially I'm studying the Psalms, kind of going through them just sporadically, but he always brings nearly every sermon back to Christ, and he makes it so tangible in how, okay, this is all that's going on, and suddenly you're hooked in and he's really relating to you, and then he brings in Christ to that in just such a magnificent way. I just love that. So, well, tell us, Doc, where everyone can reach out to you or the church website, something like that. What is the church website? Do you know?
It's Capital City. No, they changed it. You can get there. There's actually two ways to get to it. You can get to it either capitalcitychristian.org or capcity.info.
Okay.
Either one of those, capcity.info or capitalcitychristian.org, and they both take you to exactly the same place.
Okay.
But there's also a Facebook page. Just look up Capital City Christian Church Frankfurt, and there's a Facebook group as well. Now, I have to admit, I don't Facebook much. I only do it when I have to. And so if people are going to reach me, it's better to contact the church or to send to my email address, which is spattison@capitalcitychristian.org. But because if you messenger me, there's about a 1 in 100 chance that I might actually read it. And because I'm never on Facebook Messenger. And I've got a couple of guys communicating with me that way right now, and I'm always afraid I'm going to miss it because I hate Facebook. I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But
I used to call it fake book. And then once I had the ministry, I kind of thought, I was advised you need to have some social presence there. So I do that. Yeah.
We also have a place on YouTube. If you look up Capital City Christian on YouTube, you can get all of our stuff.
Very good. Very good. Well, and the God Canceled series running every Sunday, maybe through Easter. Do I have that right? If not a little after?
A little past Easter. We're going to actually turn the corner and start the Jesus part of this series on Easter Sunday.
Okay.
Because basically we're going to be talking about God, macro, and then starting Easter, we'll spend about 4 weeks. Is Jesus really the Son of God? And so it's going to be kind of an extensive series, and we're actually going to give it a couple of different titles along the way, but it's all one series. This part is God Canceled. I think we're going to do another section. We're probably going to title Fingerprints or something like that. But it is a single series. It's just that a single title slide grows old after a few weeks.
Gotcha. Keep it fresh, like fresh feeling. And by the way, I enjoy the science, and the Wednesday night groups would be in addition to the Sunday morning sermons, and the times of the sermon, the Sunday service would be 9:30 and 11. Do I have that right? Yes. Okay. And then Wednesday night at 6:30. Yes. For the supplemental kind of class that goes with the sermons. That's an open Q&A also for people who do want to come and ask questions. But I love the science, and I really appreciate your approach, and that you're sharing and you're attacking what does feel like some big issues and hard issues for many people. And what you're sharing is edifying the body and me, and I'm growing, and I really appreciate your service to the church and to our community. So thank you so much for coming on the show too.
Thank you so much for asking.
You're quite welcome.
It's a wrap, Brain Changer. And until next time, Dios primero y que Dios te bendiga. Ciao.